Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Maddie. I'm back with another auditioning to read of Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's going to be, again, I'm in the 50th anniversary, so it's all three stories combined into the quintessential story. But this is going to be the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. I've got the ISBN posted right there. Like I said, I didn't write any of this. I'm just a big fan. Gonna get the word out there. Nobody's heard about this book, it seems like. But I'm going to be reading the cool part where we see the Shadow of Moria. But yeah, without further ado, let me get started. Suddenly, Frodo saw before him a black chasm. At the end of the hall, the floor vanished and fell to an unknown depth. An outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against an enemy that might capture the first hall and the outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in a pack behind. "Lead the way, Gimli," he said. Pippin and Merry next. Straight on and up the stair beyond the door. Arrows fell among them. One struck Frodo in the back, another pierced Gandalf's hat, and stuck there like a black feather. Frodo looked behind. Beyond the fire, he saw swarming black figures. There seemed to be hundreds of orcs. They brandished spears and scimitars, which shone red as blood in the firelight. Doom, doom, rolled the drumbeats, growing louder and louder. Doom, doom. Legolas turned and set an arrow to the string. Though it was a long shot for his small bow, he drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. Two great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But when it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror, the ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away, as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form. A man's shape, maybe, yet greater, and a power and a terror seemed to be in it, and to go before it. It came over to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then with a rush it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled, and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade, like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left hand it held a whip of many throngs. "Hail, hail!" wailed Legolas. "A Balrog! A Balrog has come!" Gimli stared with wide eyes. "Durin's Bane!" he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. "A Balrog," muttered Gandalf. "Now I understand." He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. "What an evil fortune, and I am already weary." The dark figure, streaming with fire, raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed, like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as the flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This foe is beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground. Side by side, behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge, The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, and in his other hand, Glamdring gleamed cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised its whip, and the throngs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am the servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame Anur. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small, and altogether alone, gray and bent, like a wizened tree from the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then stood still again. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leapt upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back to the bridge. "Elendil," he shouted, "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and he leapt after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying alone, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon it which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out of the emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But, even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. Probably the most awesome scene in the book right there. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Auditioning to Read. It's Free Friday, so I like to post whatever I want on Free Friday. I will be streaming later on, normally 9 o'clock Eastern Central Time. You can follow me on the Twitch down below. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about that. I want to read the entirety of this book, Lord of the Rings. I've read it once, but I think it'd be cool to read it, and post it up on YouTube. But you let me know what you get. Like I said, auditioning to read. I didn't get the part yet. It's up to you guys to tell me if I got the part. But hey, thanks for stopping by. And as always, you guys have a great rest of your day. You guys are awesome.